they're not happy, but I think sometimes just doing something different.
Well, I think
feels really
sometimes you
hard.
can live in a hole and just go, there's no way out, and no one really cares, and like this sucks, and
That's not true.
there's fear, and I'm like,
People do care.
I know that there's, what's that response? Is that fight or flight when you, yeah, fight or flight. Emergent first responders. Oh, don't get your foot in the coffee. Oh, you're so cute today. First responders have to be, for the most part, first responders have to be trained to do something that you normally wouldn't do that would freeze you. So, like going into a burning building, confronting like a robbery in place. I heard a story where these two cops, one cop was super like kung fu guy, and he just was pretty sure that he wanted to disarm anybody that ever came at him. And that didn't happen in 10 years of their training. So every shift, he would get his partner to point a gun at him. I don't know how legal that is. And so he would disarm him and then give it back. Disarm him, give it back. And keep doing it over and over. And he goes into a convenience store and there's a robbery in progress. And he doesn't even think, he reacts. Disarms a guy and does what? Gives the gun back. Because he's trained his brain over and over and over again. And so first responders have to really train themselves to go into situations. Probably not give the gun back. But I think, what was my point? What were we talking about at the very beginning? Thanks for the espresso. No, there was a point.
I think your point was that we think no one cares. That's somehow you.
It's not a natural
fight or flight.
Most of us, when we're in trouble, when we're overwhelmed, when we're consumed with depression and anxiety, we freeze.
Right.
And so we're not trained to go, oh, this is what we should do, and this is a helpline,
and we actually really do need. So I'm reading a book right now about a guy who he's writing about his crash, mental health crash. He was finishing university, and
what does Brene Brown call it?
University?
No.
Did she call
when
it
she had a breakdown, she called it a breakthrough. Anyway, sorry.
So he's talking about how he recognizes that like people stepped in, like he did call people, no one knew, and then he there was like people that he would reach out to, and then he just had to keep going, like he kept going back. And in the book he actually talks about how stupid he felt because he's like this smart, like normal guy from like this great family, and he just felt so stupid that he couldn't get out of bed, and he's laying in a dark room for like weeks on end and wants to take his life, and how he had to reach out to people. And then there was people who really did help him navigate the system, because it is really hard to navigate on your own.
Yeah, it is.
I think that's the hardest part, is like getting out from that place of being alone to like inviting someone else in. And it's not, and the first person that you invite isn't necessarily maybe going to be the right person.
And your body's having reactions inside of it. And so most people freeze and they're just stuck there. It's horrible. So what I would say to people is reach out. No matter what you feel. What are we at?
And that could go for like the people that are struggling or the people that are not struggling. Because maybe if you're not struggling and you're doing really well, you can reach out to like a friend that you haven't heard from in a while.
I had a guy that would have dreams all the time, and he wasn't like a charismatic Christian kind of guy, but he would have these dreams and he'd wake up with the person so in his mind he would Facebook them. And that was like 10 years ago. And the person, like, it was just an encouragement to that person. And he wasn't doing well himself, but he would have these very vivid dreams and he'd just reach out to, so yeah, maybe that's a good word of encouragement. That's
actually really significant too, is actually, even though you're struggling and things might not be so well, you can actually be an encouragement to others. You can actually
good word.
help other people.
All right, where are we at? July 22.
Learning to trust again. Many of us have trust issues. Some of us tried long and hard to trust untrustworthy people. Over and again, we believed lies and promises never to be kept. Some of us tried to trust people for the impossible. For instance, trusting a practicing alcoholic not to drink again. Some of us trusted our higher power inappropriately. We trusted God to make other people do what we wanted, then felt betrayed when that didn't work out. Some of us were taught that life couldn't be trusted, that we had to control and manipulate our way through. Some of us were taught inappropriately that we couldn't trust ourselves. In recovery, we're healing from our trust issues. We're learning to trust again. The first lesson in trust is this: we can learn to trust ourselves. We can be trusted. If others have taught us we cannot trust ourselves, they were lying. Addictions and dysfunctional systems make people lie. We can learn to appropriately trust our higher power, not to make people do what we want them to, but to help us take care of ourselves and to bring about the best possible circumstances at the best possible times in our life. We can trust the process of life and recovery. We do not have to control, obsess, or become hyper-vigilant. We may not always understand where we are going or what's being worked out in us, but we can trust that something good is happening. When we learn to do this, we are ready to learn to trust other people. When we trust our higher power and when we trust ourselves, we will know who to trust and what to trust that person for. Perhaps we always did. We just didn't listen closely enough to ourselves or trust what we heard. Today, I can affirm that I can learn to trust appropriately. I can trust myself, my higher power, and recovery. I can learn to appropriately trust others too.
We could talk about this one all day. I think as I was listening, I know I've heard people say to you as we share our story, "Oh, you're so strong. How did you overcome all of your trust issues?" And it's interesting to hear that side, but then even on my side of breaking your trust in our marriage over and over and breaking our trust in addiction and saying I'll never do this again. But then getting to the end of my addiction, the scariest part about my whole addiction was when I couldn't trust myself. When I could see words coming out of my mouth and just like, it was almost like I could see it and they're just falling on the ground and disintegrating. And I'm like, I don't even believe what I'm saying. Like, I want to think I'm coming home tonight, but I know that I can't. That I know that that's probably not what's going to happen. And I want to go to work tomorrow, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. And I remember at the very end of even going into the bank and cashing a check from disability or whatever I was on EI. And I remember going into the bank very vividly, getting the money, and then I didn't know. I came to 2 days later in a hotel room. And so that's a scary place to be where I can't even trust myself. Scary place. But I think recovery teaches us that we can trust appropriately. I like those because I think you trusted with your whole heart and hope for the best every time. But then addiction is a progressive thing. So it's never going to, but there's an illusion of having trust, but there is no trust. So.
And I think it's actually like wrong to just say like I'll never trust again. I think that's making, like, you're making a vow, you're making such a blanket statement that actually you actually are making a choice that you will never trust again. It's not that you can't, and I think that you know, we have to want to. I mean, when people have been so hurt, they build up such thick walls usually, and so I get it. Like, I've had women ask me, well, how did you trust him again, or how did you let him come back, or
You're so strong.
You know, or how did you know? Well, I didn't know. I didn't know whether I could trust you again or not, but I did know that I had learned that I was not going to live in addiction again. And I came to believe that when you came back from rehab, I didn't have to trust you first. I could trust me and that I would make a good decision. I could trust the fact that,
Well, and if you know recovery, this is what recovery is. This is what it isn't. I remember in my early recovery at a rehab center and not thinking I'm a bit different than everybody, and I just need to be here to get what I need to get. then move on with the rest of my life. And I was confronted 3 months in to get a sponsor, and the counselor said, if you don't get a sponsor, you're going to get kicked out, so get one tomorrow. And I can still so vividly remember the anxiety and the sweaty palms of trying to ask another man to help me out, and because I didn't trust anyone. But the reality of working with a lot of men over the last 14 years, I know that if somebody fell through the ice at the Rideau Canal, they were putting up their hand and some other person put up their hand, they would be like, nah, I have trust issues. I'm not going to grab your hand as I'm done. Like, so I believe that we all have the power
That's
to
a good
trust.
example. It is a good example. You made a statement, though, a couple sentences ago that I think doesn't really make sense to most people. You said, if you know what recovery is and what it isn't. But I think what you're trying to say is that if you're dealing with addiction, if you're starting to see that someone in your life is misusing substances and it's a problem, that you actually need to research and understand addiction. Yeah. And so that's what I did. So I actually went to meetings, read books, watched, it sounds crazy, but Intervention, that show, showed me like so much about like, oh my goodness, like this is what I'm living with. And I think for lots of parents that would be helpful too, of like just not to see all the craziness, but it was just helpful for me to come out of denial. And so then a significant thing that happened is when you went to treatment, you stopped making promises and you just started telling me what was actually happening, what you were actually learning. That's so substantial because it was like,
And I did things to build trust, not having a cell phone.
Totally. You tried.
But I was in recovery, so
you were in recovery.
Both people need to know what recovery is.
And I don't think I could have articulated that at that point in time. But what I did say, I remember saying to one.
Is he going to meetings? Does he have a sponsor?
Yeah, I said.
Does he have a sponsor?
If he's
that they call, that I see, that he knows the number.
Your sponsor was coming to our house to meet with you. Sometimes you guys were meeting in the basement. Sometimes you guys were meeting at his place. But I remember saying like, if he's heading back that way to relapse, I'm gonna see it. I'm gonna know, and then I'm gonna deal with it. I trusted myself.
And in our early recovery, there was relapses. There was six months of. It took me 2 years to get 1 year clean.
Yes, so there was. You did go out.
It's not easy.
I'm just gonna go hang out with this person. And I was like, well, you're gonna drink if you go out with that person. Oh no, I'm not going to.
You don't know what you're talking about. All right, so we have the option to trust. Everybody can trust, but our trust has been broken. It's very hard.
The first I would say that I trusted. Oh, let him out. My trust first started with God, though. With God and then with myself. And I think that.
Trusting that God is good, that He has good. Amen. So, if you're in a hole, reach out your hand and just trust that somebody has good for you. Have a good day. Have a good day. See you tomorrow. But for the grace of God.
At 9.